Okay, the title of this is Basics of Crime. This lecture is Basics of Crime Research, Part 1. And we're going to cover maybe a little crime test and give you a little bit of a discussion about popular sources of crime data, their problems, and introduce you basically to the social scientific method. Okay, let's start off with a little crime knowledge test. What I'd like you to do is just answer this as best as you can, and then at the end of this test, I'll actually give you the answer. So just write down your A or A, B, or C, whatever your answer is to each of these questions, just to test yourself. Okay. Which group is larger in the United States each year? People who are killed by homicide, or people who die from infections that they get in the hospital? That means you go to the hospital, you're seeking help, you don't have an infection, and you get an infection because the hospital's dirty. Which group is larger, A or B? The vast majority of crack-related homicides are due to what? The intense high of the drug, because people get so high. Addicts needing money to buy more crack. A combination of both of those, A and B, where you're so high and you need more money to buy crack. Or disputes within the illicit drug economy. Okay, which group is the largest there? Okay, 1999 National Crime Victimization Survey reported there were 6.3 million crimes of violence. What percentage of these crimes were completed acts of violence? Okay, just write down which percentage you think is correct. Of all of the crimes of violence that reported, what percentage of them were actually completed acts of violence? Another way to look at that is which ones were just attempts. Okay, most people are murdered by strangers, yes or no? So should you fear the person, if you're worried of murder, should you worry about somebody you know or somebody you don't know? Number 5, 1989, which group of black males was the largest? Those enrolled full-time in college, those in prison. Number 6, most violent crimes in the U.S. result in a serious injury, true or false? Number 7, most violent crimes in the U.S. involve the use of a weapon, true or false? And number 8, criminal victimization has been steadily increasing for the past 25 years, 2.5 decades, true or false? Just give your honest answer. Okay, number 9, of the about 14 million thefts that occurred in 2000, what percentage were worth less than $50? Okay, there were 14 million thefts in the United States in 2000. What percentage were worth less than $50? Number 10, of the 14 million thefts in 2000, what percentage were worth more than 250? Okay, and now I'll start giving you the answer, I believe. Okay, which group is larger in the United States each year? Actually, the people who die from infections that they get in the hospital. By the way, if you're really interested in the sources for this, I do have sources for my answers, and I would give them to you. Okay. This first one is the only one that's a little bit problematic where I don't have a written source. I got this from when I went on a job interview in Utah, and a professor who had been teaching for 30 years and was about to retire was the one who gave me this. And he was a very, very, very competent and honest man, and I would be very surprised if he was lying to me there. Okay, now the rest I do actually have. The vast majority of crack-related homicides are due to disputes within the illicit drug economy. Okay, I'm giving you the source right there for number 2. Okay, 1999, the National Criminal Victimization Survey reported there were 6.3 million crimes of violence. What percentage of these crimes were completed acts of violence? About 32. Okay. So as you can see that, and according to that study, 68 were only attempts or threats, not completed acts. Okay, most people are murdered by strangers. False. Most people are murdered by acquaintances. Okay, people who they know, followed by unknown and then strangers. Most murders are crimes of passion. They're not the sort of. Most of them are not the serial killer, the person who goes postal. Okay, in 1989, there were more black males in prison than there were enrolled full-time in college. Most violent crimes do not result in a serious injury. Only 7.3 of assaults end up with a serious injury. Think about that. Only 7.3% of all assaults end up with a serious injury. Okay. Most violent crimes in the United States do not use a weapon, and then criminal victimization has actually been decreasing for the past 2.5 decades. Just so you know, in 2001, I don't know if it's still continuing, crime in 2000, criminal victimization was at the lowest rate ever measured in the United States. I believe it's starting to creep up. But in general, the trend is quite clear in the past 25 years. Okay, we'll go on. The reason why I gave you this test is not to prove you right or wrong, but I just wanted to give you an example of some you'll see in the next slides. Okay, of the 14 million thefts in the United States, what percentage are worth less than 50? 32. And then you can see the answers to 10 there. And there's the source if you want to get it. Okay, the reason why I gave you that test is because most crime information that we get is inaccurate. Okay, most crime information that we get in the general public comes from the media. Okay, or sometimes personal experience. Okay, and both are essentially inaccurate. Okay, I will get into the media in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But personal experiences are biased, and essentially they can help us ask the right sorts of questions, but they don't necessarily give us an accurate representation of the social world. So, just for example, from my mom's personal experience, she thinks that crime is rampant. Let me give you a better example of my mom. If you were a police officer and your personal experience might tell you that everybody out there is using ice. Well, that's because, as a cop, you only get called to a lot of domestics, and there are a lot of domestics where people are using drugs. So a cop's experience of the social world would be much different, say, than a professor's view of the social world, just on the people that you interact with. So both of ours are biased because we're only exposed to certain people. Okay? So your personal experiences also do not represent the social world. If you grew up in a tough neighborhood, you might think everybody's beating the heck out of everybody. I once gave some data at a lecture when I used to teach at Arizona State University, and I showed the percentage of people that are using marijuana on a regular basis, and this one student walked up to me and she goes, "That can't be accurate." This is a 19-year-old student. And I said, "Why is that?" She goes, "Because everybody I know is using pot." I said, "Well, you're a 19-year-old college student. You know a lot of people are using pot. You don't know a lot of 40 and 50-year-old people. You don't hang out with them." So her personal experiences told her that everybody's using pot, but that's just because of the people who she hangs out with. Okay, reason why the media is an inaccurate source of crime data. Most of your information that you get about crime probably comes from the news media. Okay, the problem with crime news is that it's infotainment. It's not objective. It's not an objective description of crime in the United States. Think about when you have, let's think of the evening news, or this would apply to print media, but I'm going to, for example, the local paper, but I'm going to give you an example of the evening news, where I would think more people watch the evening news than read papers. If you had a media story on crime, any crime, let's say ICE use, one of the problems with media information or a media story on ICE use is they only have a few cases. If you have a 3-minute segment on the evening news, they might only talk to 1 or 2 ICE users. They might give you an example of 2 ICE users. It's not because they're bad people, but in the news media, I used to have a friend who was a producer, and you say, "Look, I need a story on ICE users. It's now 11 o'clock. We're going on. The news will start at 11. I need it by 3 o'clock so I can edit it." So you've got 3 hours to find some ICE users. So you go out there and you find just a few cases. The other example is, well, if you need to find some ICE users, who are you going to find? Well, you'd probably go down to the local Skid Row or down to a homeless camp and try to, that would be, that'd be a good place to find ICE users. Well, how are you going to pick out an ICE user from a group of people? Well, you'd pick somebody who looks really skinny and shriveled up. Well, in that case, what you've found is not, you've found an example of an extreme ICE user. People who are living on the streets or on the beach because of their ICE use are by definition extreme users, but they're easy to find. So the media typically uses extreme examples and portrays them as the norm. Okay? So the media you'll see the person who's lost everything due to ice or crack. And those are extreme examples. Believe it or not everybody who uses ice loses everything. But in the media, we portray that what they will do is they'll portray extreme examples as the norm. They will also use expert opinions. Okay, I mean, they like to use fancy backgrounds when they use expert opinions. They'll get people with fancy initials after their name, like me, with a PhD or an MD, or the major of the Honolulu Police Department in charge of ICE, and they'll ask them their opinion. Now, a scientist, you would hope, has got data that's a little bit more accurate using the scientific method. But even when they interview academics, you have to hope that that academic is telling the truth, number one. And the greater problem is that with expert opinions, for example, they may talk to a scientist for 35 minutes, and they'll use a news clip of 8 seconds. The typical soundbite is 8 seconds. So they'll summarize everything that you said in 8 seconds. And in the media, since it's infotainment, they want to draw a crowd, and they'll try to use examples that are very dramatic. Okay, so those are some of the problems with expert opinions. What's the other thing that they'll do when they use an expert opinion? They'll use a fancy background. If they interview a professor, what will be in the background? A whole bunch of books. And that gives you the impression that they've read all these books and they're really knowledgeable. If they interview a lawyer, what's in the background? Law books. The criminal law, which come in these fancy bound books. And what is the idea? This person knows all of the law. If they interview a scientist, a hard scientist, what do they have in the background? They'll have them in a white lab coat. In the background, they'll have bubbling beakers in their laboratory. And that fancy background adds the notion of legitimacy. That fancy background influences what you think of what that person is saying. The major problem with the news is that the purpose of the news is not accuracy, is not objectivity. It is profit. So the purpose of the news is profit, not objective information. The purpose of the evening news, the newspapers, etc., those are owned by private corporations seeking to make a profit. Okay, and so it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they ask their reporters to make stories, to go out and collect data on a story in a very short amount of time. Okay, there's also a problem with the United States government sources. One example is the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports. So not all United States government sources are perfect. The FBI Uniform Crime Reports is a very popular source of data about crime, and what that uses is information from police reports. So basically, only crime that's been reported to the police will be represented in the Uniform Crime Reports. Well, if you think about it, there's a lot of crime that never gets reported to the cops. So there's a lot of crime that gets missed by the Uniform Crime Reports. I had my bike stolen about 7 times when I was a kid, and after about the first three times, I stopped reporting it to the cops because I just said, well, they're never going to find it. Okay, so I had my bike stolen a lot, but I never reported it to the cops. So that'd be a problem with the Uniform Crime Reports. So there are government sources about crime, but you need to be wary of those. They have some problems as well. So that's the main point of this bullet. While not perfect, academic information is the best source of accurate information about crime. So academic information is not perfect, and I will but it is better than what I call philosophizing in the coconut tree. Okay, the reason why it's not perfect, but it's the best or most accurate form of information about crime, because scientists, social scientists who study crime are required to follow rules that help them gather objective information about the social world. I'm not going to get into the exact rules in this lecture, but just as a general rule, you should know that you should look towards academic information, because they follow rules and they have rules that restrict the way that they gather information that lead to not perfect information. That's very important. It's not perfect. It's not foolproof, but it is the most accurate because of the rules in which they use allows them to really collect the most objective data possible in most cases. So social science information is not perfect, but it is far better than philosophizing under the coconut tree. What I mean by philosophizing under the coconut tree would be using your own opinion to describe crime. The alternative to using social science method to gather information would be you and me sitting, well, hey, Mike, that's my name, Mike, what do you think how bad do you think crime is in the U.S.? And, you and I are, and I would, I don't know, what do you think? And you and I are, fairly educated, smart people, and, we just come up with a number, right? How bad do you think drug use is in the United States? Or how many people are using ice in Hawaii right now? How many people who are living on the beach homeless are using ice? Okay, well, if you just philosophize on the coconut tree, use your personal opinion, you are going to have a biased opinion, and it's not going to be accurate. So the alternative to the social scientific method is philosophizing under the coconut tree. And in fact, that's why you might have heard a PhD is called a doctorate in philosophy. And the scientific method actually arose because we sort of figured out over time that when people just philosophize, even really smart people or really educated people, and they don't have any data to back up their philosophizing, their theories, what happens is they make incorrect theories. So what you need is data to back up the coconut tree. What people used to just think as a matter of course is that dark-skinned people, some Europeans used to think that people who were non-European weren't as smart as them. And many cultures believe that women are not as smart or not as capable as men when it comes to doing math and science. Well, in fact, what they've sort of realized by studying little kids is they found out that little girls are taught that when teachers ask a question, what's 2 + 2? It's little boys who yell out the answers more than little girls. And it's something about the social milieu, about school, that makes little girls not tend to do as well in math. And in fact, when they measure all girls schools, what they find is that girls tend to do much better in math when it's just a group of girls and it's not mixed. Boys are more, for a variety of reasons, and I'm not saying it's inborn or not, but boys are more aggressive. So that's an example of why the point here is this, is that philosophizing under the coconut tree, having opinions that are not based upon objective data, leads to errors. And that's why we should use the social scientific method, or social scientific information. Explain in greater detail this social scientific method of collecting data. That's the end of this slide.